Hello everybody and welcome to this image critique where I'm going to give my critical appraisal of another photographer's images. So if you'd like to take part, I need 3 to 5 images from you and perhaps the raw originals as well. And the aim is for me to just give my review, if you like, of your images. So I will be talking about some positive aspects too, but obviously people learn most from the sort of critical ideas, and I know that when it's come to my vlogs, people have found criticism of my own images helpful. So hopefully you'll find this interesting. I'm really recording these videos as a bit of a distraction for everyone from what's going on in the world at the moment with the coronavirus. There's plenty of bad news, but hopefully this is a welcome distraction for you all. I am going to be doing these videos in one take, warts and all, so to speak, so you'll have to forgive my mumbling and any production issues I might have, because I'd like to be able to do these every day, and if I end up taking too much time over it, then I won't be able to do that. So with that in mind, I've got 5 really nice photos here from a photographer called Steffen Eidem. And he's taken these in the Brecon Beacons in South Wales. They're a nice set of 5 photos of waterfalls that nicely fit together. So again, if you do want to take part, then please, a series would be great. So yeah, we're doing some waterfall editing today, or I should say critiquing. So let's get started with that. Okay, so here are those 5 images that Steffen submitted, and I'm actually just going to hop straight into Photoshop here to talk about them individually. So just select a red brush here so that I can draw compositional guides over the pictures. So this is the first shot. We've actually got 3 from this little cascade here. A nice portrait scene. There's some really nice characteristics of this view actually, which you know, I can really understand why Steffen's gone for this shot. What really catches my eye is this lovely arcing line here, and this beautiful flowing water coming off the edge of the cascade. That to me is the clear focal point of the image, and it's really beautiful. And you have these lovely late autumn colours. It almost looks like spring actually, because you've just got some yellows coming through in the oak tree here. Yeah, our autumns in the UK can be quite late, particularly on the oak trees in sheltered areas. So I haven't actually checked when this is taken, but quite often autumns in November as opposed to October in these more sheltered locations. So we've also got some nice light coming through that isn't too contrasty for the image, and Steffen's done a really good job of balancing the contrast that there is in the scene. It doesn't look artificial to me, and you can see the natural sunlight starting to just blow those greens, but it's almost perfectly handled, I would say, in terms of the edit, and so the overall effect is very successful. But here's the critique side of things. For this kind of scene, I really want to focus on this lovely curve and this cascade here. That to me is the focal point, and the trees behind are an essential part of that setting. Unfortunately, these distractions, and I would say there are distractions in the foreground, are a bit of a problem for the image. This rock on the right is really blockish. It's very heavy feeling, and it certainly draws the eye. And whilst this fallen tree here at the bottom has some interesting characteristics, it's quite messy, it's quite contrasty, and your eye is naturally going to be drawn to it. So particularly this kind of edge here, where you've almost got a black and white contrast. That really does unfortunately detract from what I think is the best part of the image. Another thing you could consider to simplify it down is perhaps losing some of these highlights at the top by literally just doing a crop. So I will just do that just so that you can see what I mean there. This could be a personal taste thing. And actually I'm going to crop out most of that foreground there. And that sort of gives you an idea of how you might simplify. Of course, this then perhaps starts to be too simple, and potentially need to lose that block on the right hand side as well. And then you've still got the problem with this this tree creeping into the corner. Some photographers might be tempted to clone that out. I'm not one of those. I just don't clone much myself. Only transient features. But I think if you did, then you'd have a really nicely balanced, simple image. And perhaps I'd choose a longer exposure to get rid of some of this texture at the bottom. And we'll see from one of Steffan's later images that he's done that, and he's got a better shutter speed perhaps on one of these later photos. So there, I'm simplifying. I'm trying to get rid of some of the distractions, but it's a really nice image, and I love this curve and this cascade. Okay, so onto this more panoramic format. So this was actually shot as a single frame. It's not two frames put together, and this is of that same cascade, just this time looking upriver. I do get the sense that maybe it's just slightly off level. This seems to slope downhill in this direction. Gosh, that's a massive brush there. Yeah, so I think that's just sloping slightly downhill, which to me gives the visual cue that perhaps it isn't level, although maybe it is. That's the problem with water. Sometimes it can be truly level, but it doesn't look level. Again, we've got this lovely curve. Not much of a curve there. Let's try that again. This lovely curve, and it's particularly good that you've got this almost perfect spacing between those two curves. That really is a nice feature of the image. Unfortunately, we still have these distractions creeping in. Again, if you like cloning, you could certainly clone this branch out on the right hand side, and even maybe this rock on the left. The shutter speed's pretty much ideal, I would say. You've got lovely motion in the water without losing the sense that the water is real, if you like. So that's very effective. I'm guessing this is somewhere around half a second, something like that. In terms of white balance, this one's a little bit too warm. It's easily done, and particularly when you're shooting autumnal images, because of course you're trying to enhance these warm autumnal colours in the oak trees here. And if you select a warmer white balance, then those yellows and oranges do come through more, and the same with the peaty colours in the water. But for me, I see it as a bit of a colour cast. So I've just done a quick edit here which shows you the neutral version, and suddenly you can see why you might choose maybe this warmer, darker edit, because actually it's got a more autumnal atmosphere to it. And that really is a personal taste thing. That's a question of whether you want to create an atmosphere with your edit, or whether you want to edit in a strictly realistic way. I would always be inclined towards the latter, though in this case, of course, you lose so much atmosphere that in fact I would be forced to come back, perhaps when there was more colour on the trees and the season had moved on a little bit. You can see also there's a distortion difference here, and I think that will be because Steffan's used lens corrections, so used sort of a lens correction checkbox in his RAW converter, which I assume is Lightroom. One word on that is that potentially there's firstly very little difference between the two in terms of the distortion and the detail, but by correcting distortions, Lightroom will just lose the tiniest bit of sharpness here and there. So if there's no real straight edges in the image, if you're not photographing buildings, for example, then I wouldn't bother with those kind of profile corrections, because they're a bit unnecessary and you just lose a tiny bit of image quality. So yeah, really nice image. Just a shame about those distractions. I mean, there really is no way compositionally that you could work around that. I mean, you can start trying to move the camera forward and looking down, but it's not really going to work. You want to keep this full length of the rapid here. So a nice image, but a shame about those bits on the left and right there. Okay, and now this portrait image. Now this one is much more successful. In fact, you're just looking at my edit there, where you can see I've corrected what I perceive to be a slight tilt to the right hand side. But I really love the layering effect here. You've got these very consistent lines running through all the way to the back, nicely stacked up and geometric. Perhaps there's just the tiniest bit too much foreground water, perhaps maybe where these textures run out at the bottom of the image. I could crop in there, and equally you could have a play around with the top of the image here. Stefan's done some highlight recovery, so if I just bring you in here, you can see it starts to look a bit I don't know, strange in the very most detailed areas around these highlights. The highlight to shadow transition just looks a bit strange, a bit flat, a bit artificial. And my experience with these areas is often it's best to just let the sky blow out to white. Although again, that's personal taste. You may prefer it with some of those blues coming through. Another thing I noticed, this left-hand side is a bit brighter than the right-hand side, so I'd slightly rebalance those two just to create a bit more general tonal balance in the image. And there's also a lack of blacks on this left-hand side, so I just introduced some blacks. Again, I'm not going to take you through the processing technique of that. But this is my edit here. So you can just see on that left-hand side, it's just slightly darker and the shadows are just slightly deeper. And on the right-hand side, I've just brightened it up a little bit and then corrected that rotation slightly. And then finally, I might just do a little crop. So I was thinking of a crop something like this. And then potentially you can also look at cropping in from the top just to reduce the amount of sky in there. Of course, the way the tree frames this area is actually quite nice, so you need to have a think about where that edge might lie. But yeah, I mean, I'd probably go with something like that myself, and then maybe I would consider cropping in from the left-hand side as well, because this is a bit blocky, this shape here. Why is that not drawing? Because I'm on the wrong layer. There we go. So that shape is, I don't know, it doesn't interest me so much. It's a bit heavy, so I'd probably just crop in a little bit there, just do something like that. Okay, so that one, lovely image, really like it. I'd just do a few things slightly differently. Right, so here's probably the social media favourite of the bunch. I haven't put these to the masses, obviously, because they're Stefan's images, but you've got some stunning light here, some real atmosphere. I love this little shadow of the tree on the water here, where you've got the foam. The shutter speed is great for the texture in the waterfall itself. Maybe it'd be nice to have a longer exposure just purely for the texture in the foreground here. But it's a fairly minor point that maybe some of this sort of contrasty foreground detail could be cleaned up a bit with that longer exposure. It's maybe a tiny bit warm again. I had a quick go. I mean, this is a really small change, but I just slightly cooled down the white balance. You can see Stefan's hand here, top right. I guess he's trying to stop the lens from flaring, and he's unfortunately not given me the hand-free version, but that's a great technique for improving contrast. So good technique there from Stefan, shielding the sun physically with his hand, and then I guess taking it a second exposure so that he's got that detail in the top right corner. If I just go to my edit here quickly, I mean, aside from the hand creeping at the top here, some of this in the top of the frame isn't, I think, adding to the shot, and so I'd be inclined to crop that out. And similarly at the bottom here, I'd actually just crop up to where the that pattern ends in the foreground. So I'm actually switching to a more panoramic format. So that's that there, and I think that just makes a little bit more of the lighting effect too. So I'd probably come in and crop like this with this particular scene. Let's talk ideal world as well. It's a great thought process for you. No matter what you're photographing, there's always going to be something wrong. Landscape photography is an art of compromise. You'll never find that perfect scene, or at least if you do, it will be a sand dune or something intrinsically simple. And in a perfect world, this branch here would not be running straight over the water. You know, maybe it would be doing something like this and sort of hanging over the top in a really perfect way. So I often like to go through that thought process with my images, to think, what would the ideal image look like? And then when you find something close to ideal, it makes it even more special, of course. But another lovely image, really like that one. And finally, probably the best of the bunch in some ways. This is a waterfall you can actually jump from the top of here if you're brave. I've done it a few times. I don't recommend it because you might break your legs, but yeah, it's a pretty special waterfall, this one. It's sort of archetypal waterfall, just dropping off a ledge here and into this lovely plunge pool. And the long exposure is particularly effective at creating that dreamy look to the water, but also in creating these lovely water patterns. And the way that the bubbles have moved through the water here really is stunning. This S curve here, wow, what a shape to have in your image. The same with this circular rotation of bubbles, and then these flowing lines of the waterfall. It's just a lovely combination, and that's before we talk about the foreground lines here. I love these curves coming together. I think they work brilliantly. You even get that sense with the rock here in the foreground. So I think actually this ties together beautifully. All these lovely curving lines. Really nicely composed. Now, I do have a few points of critique. Firstly, let's talk that perfect world idea. Well, perfect world, you wouldn't have this shape here, maybe these sort of more broken edges. That's not ideal. If you could have a flowing line like this one here, sort of continuing along the top, then that would be wonderful. Also, we have this foreground element of the fern here, which very clearly is not growing out of the log, so someone has presumably put it there, possibly Stefan. I don't know. I don't really like that sort of thing in photography, the sort of placed foreground element, whether Stefan did it or not. I find it a bit awkward and distracting, and I'm not sure in this case that it adds that much to the image anyway. I think that foreground does work, gives a good sense of setting to the waterfall. And actually, you're looking at my edit here. Let's zoom in again. This was Stefan's original edit, and he's just left a little bit too much brightness for me and colour in the top of the image. Your eye just starts to get drawn out of the top. So quite often, regardless of whether it's a waterfall scene or a landscape scene with the sky, I'm actually darkening the top portion of the image just to hold the eye in the frame. So that's what I've done here, and I've also set a black point around the waterfall because it was just looking a little bit washed out. So you can just see that increase in contrast around the waterfall there. And I actually set a white point in the water as well. So I'm just trying to make that waterfall even more of a focal point. But I have to say, I've seen many versions of this waterfall, and this is a particularly good one. So really good job here, Stefan. And thanks for submitting those images, because that is the last of the 5. And if you'd like to take part, then please do send me your images, the edited versions as well as the raw files. You can send them to my email address, alex@alexnail.com, and we transfer them over to me. And hopefully I'll have more of these coming in the coming days.